So, question number 50 says, in John chapter 20, the Bible tells us that Jesus appeared to his disciples without Thomas and then appeared to all of them 1 week later. What was Jesus doing during that week between these two appearances? Okay? And so, what we have in John chapter 20 is this. We have Jesus, first of all, appearing to Mary Magdalene, and then that night appearing to his 10 disciples. And you say, well, 10, I thought there was 12. Well, remember, Judas Iscariot has already gone out, betrayed Jesus, and did what he did at this point. And so that leaves 11, but Thomas wasn't there. And so what we see is that verse number 19, it says, on the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. When we go back to the book of Luke, we see that there was a little bit more to that than what we read in the book of John. What we read in the book of Luke is that Jesus appeared to two unnamed disciples as they were going on the road to Emmaus. And then those unnamed disciples then come back to these disciples, to the 10 disciples, and tell them that they had seen the Lord, which they did not believe them at first. And then all of a sudden, Jesus comes and appears before them right underneath the locked doors, or in the locked doors. And when they saw him, they thought it was a ghost, and they were terrified. And so Jesus told them, that is, put your hands and see the prints. He asked them for a piece of fish. He asked them for something to drink. He wanted them to touch him because he wanted them to see that he was real. He wasn't just simply a spirit that had come back to them, that he was there in his glorified body, but it was a body nonetheless. And so that was then. But then when we go forward into verse number 24, it says, now Thomas, called Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it. If you remember that, of course, Jesus had the nails pierced in his hands, and he also had a spear that was pierced in his side. And that's what Thomas was referring to. And so what we see is in verse number 26, a week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. And that's where Thomas gets the nickname Doubting Thomas, even though the others were doubting just the same up until when they saw the resurrected Jesus. And so Thomas, in verse number 28, said to him, my Lord and my God. Then Jesus told him, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. And so, that includes us. And that is, hopefully we believe in Jesus. I believe in Jesus. I think all of you believe in Jesus, in the resurrected Jesus. And, we haven't seen him. And even though we haven't seen him, we still believe that Jesus came back to life. And, we are even more blessed than Thomas and the other disciples were. So the question is, you got this week's span here where Jesus appeared, and then Jesus, went away, and then Jesus appeared again. So what was Jesus doing in between these 2 days? And the simple answer to the question is, I don't know. I think he was doing then what he is doing now. I don't think that he was just lounging about. I think that he was very busy being the Son of God, just as he is right now, being very busy being the Son of God. But let's take a look at something real quick. Let's take a look at the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15. So in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, we see that Paul goes on to talk a little bit about Jesus. And what we see here in verse number, we'll just start back in verse number 3. He says, "For what I received I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter and then to the 12, and after that he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and to all the apostles, and last of all he appeared to me also as to one abnormally born." And so, Paul lists several different appearances that Jesus made after his resurrection. Jesus made appearances for about 40 days to give the disciples convincing proof that he really was alive. Now, if you look at some of these that are here in 1 Corinthians 15, these are not in other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And that is, for example, when you look at the verse number 5, it says, "And that he appeared to Peter." Okay? So we know that Jesus appeared to Peter, and we know that he appeared to him, collectively with all the disciples, but we know that Jesus appeared to Peter personally, but when you go and read the Gospels, you don't see that he goes and appears to Peter personally. When Jesus appears to Peter, he's appearing with all the other disciples there. And so here is a case where Jesus appeared to Peter. In fact, it could be that he appeared to Peter before he even appeared to the 12 or to the 10 that were in the upper room. And not only that, but if we continue on down, it says that, he appeared to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of his brothers at the same time. And then you notice in verse number 7, it says, "Then he appeared to James and to all the apostles." And so here is Jesus' half-brother that we talked about last week in question number 48 that did not believe in Jesus. And so Jesus comes and appears to him, and it could be that he appeared to other of his half-brothers at the same time. But then again, that is something that when you go to the Gospels, you don't see a record of Jesus coming and making an appearance to James. And so what I'm saying is that the record that we have of Jesus' appearances, there are some things, some people that Jesus appeared to that we don't have in the Gospels. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that Jesus made other appearances other than what's recorded for us, because we've got those that are recorded in the Gospels. We've got these that are recorded here. Did Jesus make appearances to other people? I don't know. It doesn't say that he does. But at the same time, it's not a stretch of the imagination to say that he could have. I'm not saying he did. I'm not saying he probably did. I'm not saying he should have. I'm just saying that it could be that maybe Jesus made other appearances post-resurrection that, we don't have. But then again, you say, okay, well, what was he doing during that week? I don't know. Was he appearing to people? I don't know. It doesn't say anything about that. We can't figure it out. But then again, you think, well, what is Jesus doing right now? Well, right now, Jesus is at the right hand of the Father, and he is waiting for his enemies to be made a footstool for his feet. And once his enemies have been made a footstool for his feet, then Jesus is going to come back again one day. In the meantime, what he's doing is he's there in heaven, and he is our great high priest, and he's mediating for the sins of believers, and he's being an intermediary for us and the Father. And if that is a full-time job right there. And so I'm sure that Jesus, as he was doing, whatever he was doing, wherever he was during that week, there had to be times that Jesus was at the right hand of the Father doing exactly what he was doing right now. Okay? All right. Do you have any other thoughts on that one?
In verse 30, it does say, too, that Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book.
Right.
So could he have been doing that during that time? Probably not because you haven't seen them yet.
Right. I mean, there's this, where he appears to the disciples, then he appears to all of them. He is not going around performing miracles for the people. Definitely. What he's doing is he's coming, at least for what we see in the Gospels and there in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, is that the people that he is appearing to are very specific, select people, because as what it says in the book of Acts, he's trying to give them convincing proofs of his resurrection, because these are the people that are going to have to be putting their lives on the line from this point forward. We kind of think, oh, well, the disciples, they just testified of Christ. But, we don't stop to think about the kind of pressure that they were under to be a witness of Christ. I mean, they stood up in front of the same people that conspired to kill Jesus and boldly declared, if we get down to it, we're going to read about it in Acts chapter 5 and verse 30, one of those times. But I mean, very boldly and plainly declared about how Jesus was unjustly crucified, how the people that they're very talking to were the ones that crucified him, and how God raised him from the dead. And in order to have that kind of confidence and boldness, well, first of all, you've got to have the Holy Spirit, indwelling, but you also have to have a really convincing idea for yourself that it's real. You're not going to go and make such bold statements of something that you just kind of think, of, well, it could be or maybe, I mean, these men were, this is just as real as, the day is bright. So, I don't know if that answered the question or not, but just went off on a little tangent.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that these signs were done just for the disciples.
Well, okay, so when we look at that, let me see, in verse number 30, Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not recorded in the book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you have life in his name. So this is encompassing the whole book of John. And so it's not just simply the miracles that Jesus performed post-resurrection. It is all of them that he performed, and all the miracles he performed in the sight of his disciples. And so all of these are recorded so that when you take the entire book of John as a whole, it's there to say, they're written so that you can believe that Jesus is the Christ. Because we can't see those miracles, obviously, because he did them so many years ago. But we've got these books, this book and then Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there to testify of them. And so, there's so many that were recorded or so many that were done that he goes on down later on to say, in verse number 25, Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. And so of all the things that Jesus did, what we see in the book of John is just a small little number of what they are. So, he's happy.
He is happy.
Oh, happy day. I figured out what a Lego is.
The 1 Corinthians chapter 15,
Yeah.
going on a little bit further where it says in verse 8, and last of all he appeared to me also as to the one abnormally born.
Right.
Okay, that was Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And abnormally born meaning like when Jesus appeared to him on the road.
Meaning that he is going to be a disciple that's unlike or an apostle that is unlike the other apostles. And so the apostles had several things in common. They were with Jesus from the beginning. They had been baptized by the baptism of John the Baptist, and they had seen the resurrection of Christ and were an eyewitness of him. And so those were the criteria that when Peter came before the church in Acts chapter 1, he said, we've got 2 men to select. This is what needs to, or we need to replace somebody to replace, we need to find somebody to replace Judas. Okay. That's a better way of saying what I was trying to say. We need to find somebody to replace Judas, and we need to find somebody who has that criteria. Okay? So when you look at Paul didn't have that criteria, did he? He was not baptized by John the Baptist. He was baptized by Ananias. He was not with Jesus from the beginning. We don't know when Paul came into the scene, but what we read about is in Acts chapter 7, where he is there holding the cloak of people who stoned Stephen. So, how far, at what point did he come into Jerusalem? Did he see Jesus in his earthly ministry? Did he have any kind of interactions with him? Well, we don't know because, we just have that. So that's why he's saying he's untimely born, because he's saying that he did see Jesus in his resurrected body. And so some people look at that and say, well, that was when Jesus came to Paul in a vision of the light on the road to Damascus. And I guess that could be so, but I'd rather think that when you look in the book of Galatians, that Paul gives a timeline of what his early ministry is, and he goes to Arabia and spends 2 years in Arabia. And so I just think that when Paul was in Arabia, that was when Jesus was appearing to him, teaching him and instructing him just the same amount of time that he would have done that with the other apostles as well. And so, that's why I think he says that he's abnormally born, because he's just not like the other apostles, which didn't make him an apostle in the least. It's just that he was different. And as a matter of fact, he had a different job to do too. That is, that he was appointed to be an apostle and teacher to the Gentiles. So, anybody else?